Hey, welcome to part 2 of ex2-getdate, and I'm still in js.do or js.do. And what I did, I already did it, but I didn't record this, but I always thought that this was for saving an external JS file, but it's not. What I did here with the one I had, I just had save as new JS. Now it's going to give me an error now, but what you can do is if you change the name up here and then do save as new JS, it'll save that. It kind of helps because when you change the name here and you do save update, I already lost one by doing that. So what I recommend doing, if you have part 1 open, just change the name to part 2 and say save as new JS. That's almost like save a copy. So I'd recommend doing that. So again, I'll just repeat this again. First, change the name to part 2 and then do save as new JS, and it'll save that in your username area with your saved code, and it'll save that in there. So again, change the name and then use this, and then as you're working, then you can save updates. So just want to point that out. I would have recorded that while I was doing it, but I thought this had saved as a JS file, but it doesn't. It saves exactly what you have, which is fine. Okay, so we're on to part 2, and what we're going to do is we're just going to put this in a string down here. And if you notice the other sample that we had, it was bigger and bolder. So what I'm going to do, just to make it a little different, I'm going to make a new paragraph, and I'm going to just make it separate. Instead of a paragraph, I'm going to make it a heading. And in HTML, we're going to use I'll use an H2, so it's not the biggest heading. And I'll give it an ID. You could give an ID to any HTML element, and I'll say ID equals, and I'll just call it DateString, because that's what it's going to be. That just identifies it as DateString. And I'll close that. And notice it's in red. It means I have an error. It's because I didn't put a double quote here. So I'll do that. And then in this date string, it's going to be empty because we're not going to display anything yet. And then I'll just put a closing H2. So instead of a paragraph, we had p tags here, which are just regular paragraphs. This will, if I just put hello and run this code, you can see it just makes it bigger and bolder. So that way our date string will show up a little bit bigger than these things that are here in regular paragraphs. So I'll take this out. So it'll be empty until we write our string in here. We're going to write a string by basically concatenating these values that we get in here, and also we're going to have to put some strings in here with quotes. We're going to try to put it to say today is January 31st, 2017, complete with commas and spaces and all that. But before we do that, we have a couple things to do. We're going to make some variables, because if we make one more statement here, and I'm going to copy it, and because I put a space here, I'll put a space just to separate it from all the ones that are basically getting, using those get date methods. If we put a statement here that's going to write something, and I'll just delete this right now, and it's going to be in this date string, so I'll type that out. It's going to be in here. So we're going to have, this is getting that H2, and it's going to write whatever we want here. So, if I put, I could just put a string here right now and put hello and put it down here. And it should do the same thing that I did before. So if I run the code, it should say hello down here, because it's saying to that H2, write in hello. Except we're not going to write in hello. What we're going to write in is going to be a string that includes all the values that we got from these methods that pulled from the date object. So we're going to do that. Now the problem is we're going to be adding together, the value from here, the value from there, and this is going to get real long. And it's going to be on two or three lines, and you might be stretching this out, and it just gets harder to read and it gets harder to find errors. So what we're going to do, instead of writing our whole string here, is we're going to make a variable, and we're just going to call it, now we already have one, we have a thing here called DateString, and instead of calling it DateString, I think what I'll just call it, I'll call it today's date. How about that? So that's going to say today's date. We're going to make a variable, but it's going to display in this H2. So we'll call a variable today's date. Now, I wrote today's date. We don't have a variable called today's date yet. So we're going to have to do that. So what we're going to put in there is we're going to put the values from here, and we might even want to make those a little bit, put variables for those as well. But let's get started with that. First of all, today's date, we're going to make a variable, and I'm just going to keep this separate. I'm going to put var, and I'm going to call it today's date, because we have to basically declare that variable before we use it. Today's date, and it's going to equal, and it's basically going to be a string that says something like today is, and then a space, and then finish the quote, and I'll put a capital letter here. And then it's going to plus, and then it's basically going to have the get full year and all this. And we could put these in here, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make variables for all of these as well, so that this string is a little easier to read. So we got a little bit more code to write in here. So what I'm going to do, so we're going to put, you know, I didn't finish this yet, so if I run it, we're going to get an error. But we're basically going to use variables for these things, because we don't want to put all this stuff in here. So what I'm going to do, and I'll show you this too, I'm going to copy these 4 lines, because why not? And I'll hit return twice, and I'll paste them. So you might say, why are you pasting all these? Because we're going to make variables that equal these things. I'm just going to call this year. And don't worry if it's the same as an ID. That's okay. We're going to call it year. And then we'll call this one month. Get rid of all this stuff. Call this one date. Get rid of all this stuff. And call this one day. Now, we can't just say year equals that, because we can if we had declared them, but we didn't declare them yet. So we have to put var between all of these. So we have to tell JavaScript that these things are variables. And that's why we don't have to worry about if these are the same names as some of the things we used up here. If we used month, date, and day up there, they're ID names, but we're telling JavaScript these are variables. So it's okay if they have the same name. We only use these to basically to pull that information from those paragraphs. So those are the names of paragraphs. These are the names of variables, and they're called variables. So we shouldn't have any problem by doing that. And I even called this one just year, month, date, day. So we're going to use those. That way we can use variables in here and don't have to worry about using d.getDay and semicolons and all that kind of stuff in there, because that could get a little confusing. Okay, so we're just going to use variables in here. So what we're going to do today is, and we're basically going to have it be like today is the day. We're going to put like today is Tuesday. So what I'm going to do next after this plus sign is going to put the variable name for the day. So that's going to be day. And then I'm going to have to put a plus sign again to concatenate. And I like putting spaces in between here. The spaces don't count. The spaces count when they're in the string, but these spaces do not count, but they just help us read it. So after day, today is Tuesday, and then it's going to be January. Now we don't want to put day and date or day and month right close together. So next is going to be month. So what I'm going to put after that, today is Tuesday, and I'll just show you this for a second. I think I did it before. So today is, and then we have Tuesday, which is the day, and then we're going to have a comma space. So we have to remember to do the comma space here. And then there's another comma after the date. So I'm just going to go back to that. So just remember that, you know, you could do that later if you find it's all jammed together, then you could put it in. But right away I'm going to put in I'll put in a quote because it's a string, and the comma space is a string. So we have today is Tuesday, and then we have to do the concatenation again, and the next thing is going to be the month, and we could just type month because we have a variable called month, which is right here. And today is Tuesday, January, and then we need a space. So we have to put in just a space. A space is part of a string. You have to put in an empty space between quotes, and then I'll add again. And then after the space of January, we're just going to put the date, which is just date. And then again, another plus sign. And then we're also going to have another comma space, because after January and we put the number, we typically put a comma and then the number. So we're also going to do in quotes again, because it's a string, another comma space, and then another plus. And you could stretch this out if you want. And then add day. And then if you want it, you can end it there with a semicolon, or you could even put a period, which would basically be quotes and a period. You could end it like that and then put a semicolon. So that's our string. So just remember that the strings are just basically our English language that we're using, and then we just are interspersing them with variables separated by plus signs. So that's our string. So if we did that right now, let's just see what happens. I didn't check everything yet, but let's see what happens. There it is. Today is 2, which is Tuesday. 0 is January. Now, I'm missing... Oh, no, that's right. I was thinking I need another comma there. So today is Tuesday, January 31st, and, oh, we didn't put the year. I put the day again. I'm sorry, this is my mistake. This should be year at the end here. So today is, let me run that code again. And there it is. So today is Tuesday, January 31st, 2017. That's what we want. And now it's almost what we want. This is the end of part 2. This is basically showing a string that's using the values that we want, except we're going to have to convert 2 to Tuesday and 0 to January, if it's still January when you're working on this, which it may not be. It may be February by the time you do it and by the time I finish recording this and uploading the instructions and all that. But anyway, when I'm doing it, it's January 31st. So yours would probably have a 3, and it would have a 1 for February, and it would have a 1 for the date, you know, or 1 or 2 if you're doing it on February 1st or 2nd or whatever. So anyway, that's what we have for part 2. So we're good with part 2. What we're going to do next is we're going to have to do arrays that are actually going to substitute for just the day of the week, which is Tuesday, and also for the month, because they're not putting in month names, and they don't do that. They're just putting in, you know, numerals here to do that. So we're going to have to translate that using something called an array. I mean, you could have just made a variable and said, you know, and thrown it in there, and you could, but then it wouldn't update. You want it so it updates. So whatever day it is, it's going to update, and whatever, you know, if you look at it next month, it should update as well. So we don't want it stuck on January or stuck on Tuesday. We want it flexible, so it's pulling from the date object, and that requires, we're going to use an array to do that. And so we're going to do an array of names, and then the names will just kind of link up to where they are in the list, so that, you know, 0 is January, 1 is February, and so on. Same thing, 0 is Sunday, and 1 is Monday, and so on. So we're going to do that with arrays, and that'll be part 3. But right now, this should be it with part 2. If you wrote your string, and again, what we did is we made a new paragraph called, an H2 paragraph called DateString, and then we basically have a statement here that basically pulls, you know, it identifies DateString, and it says write today's date. And we just did that because it's nice and short, and then today's date is basically this string. So that's what we have, and we just have to do one more step so that we can have the month translate as names and have the day translate as names. So we'll do that in part 3, but we're done with part 2. And again, you can send these one at a time, or you could just wait until you get it all done. But it's good to have these parts in case you mess anything up. So when I do part 3, I'll show you how to save it, just in case you have any problem doing that.